Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David E.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Longstrugs.
Aloha and good morning. Thanks so much for starting your week off with us. I'm Ryan Kalei Suji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. This morning, Yanji, we're catching up with a guest who is joining us from our nation's capital.
That's right. We're joined by Congressman Ed Case live from his office in Washington, D.C. Congressman, thank you for being here.
Good afternoon here. Aloha to everybody back home.
Well, it's good to be with you. Let's start with something we know you've been paying a lot of attention to, and that is Red Hill. Since the last time we spoke, the Navy's released their updated timeline, shaving off about 3 months at the end. What do you think about this accelerated timeline? Is it accelerated enough?
Well, I wish it was faster. I mean, I think we all wished that we could accelerate it even further. But I think that the bottom line remains safety first. And if experts out there, including the Navy's experts and other independent experts that the Navy consulted with in preparing that report, say that we've got to get ready before we defuel, then we have to do that. I think that there's really no choice to that. So, you know, as much as I'd like to accelerate it, and I take it as good news that we were able to accelerate it from the Navy's initial projection, which was, you know, way too long for my comfort or anybody else's. We still have to put the safety first. And so if that's what it is from a scientific perspective, that's what it is. And we just need to pull it off.
If you can explain and maybe talk a little bit about just the interaction that you're having right now with military officials who are coordinating this effort. Is this a weekly conversation that you're having? Are these conversations and these talks with Navy officials something that is happening on a regular basis? And how are you sticking and holding officials to the timeline that they presented?
Well, it's far more frequent than weekly. It is early and often, I guess I would put it that way. We consult with the Navy and others, and so not just the Navy, but the Department of Health, the Board of Water Supply, the community, my colleagues in Congress, both within the congressional delegation, my Appropriations Committee, obviously, because we're right in the middle of trying to fund the second year at $1 billion plus. And so there's this is one of the most major areas in my entire office, has been for some time now, and it's not slacking off. There's a lot that is still happening. We obviously want the Navy to complete its plan to defuel and close Red Hill as soon as possible. We need to fund it. We need, by the way, to remind everybody, we need both the Environmental Protection Agency and the State Department of Health to approve the Navy's plan. That takes a lot of my time to make sure that process is moving along, because that's critical to the time frame. Part of that time frame is getting that approval and then implementing the plan. We have heard repeatedly, troublingly, from too many members of the community about their view that there are continuing and persistent health concerns. I've worked with my colleagues in the delegation to communicate that directly to the Department of Defense. We're obviously focused, I already talked about it, on appropriations. And so it's across a broad range of efforts, but the bottom line remains to defuel and close Red Hill as expeditiously as possible to handle any consequences to the community from the leaks at Red Hill, and to find the replacements for that fuel from a national security perspective, and to fund all of that. And so, you know, there are frequent communications and oversight and questions on my part in all of those channels.
You know, there's been talk of the Department of Defense appointing a commander who would basically be in charge of the defueling and whatever comes next for the facility. How soon do you expect that to happen? What have those conversations been like?
I'm smiling because I've known for a couple of days now that was going to be announced today, and I've known who it is, and I've been under an embargo. But literally 7 minutes ago, as I was getting ready for this appearing with you, they did in fact announce the head of that task force. This is a task force set up by the Secretary of Defense himself to to provide a single focal point for the Department of Defense to essentially oversee the entire effort, not just the Navy, but there are other services involved. Admiral John Wade, who has been at INDOPACOM for some time now and who's familiar with Hawaii, but has not been directly involved in Red Hill. And I think that that's important. This is a person that knows Hawaii, that has been through this with all of us, but is this is not the person that was in charge of Red Hill, being in charge of defueling and closing Red Hill. So I'm comfortable with that choice, and that should be on your press lines right now.
If you can talk about that relationship, I guess, moving forward, I mean, what role will you and the congressional delegation play in this communication with this appointed leader, if you will, of this project? And how are you folks wrapping in? Because when you think about this problem and the issue that has arisen, there are so many voices that are involved. I mean, we're hearing from, of course, all of you in DC in the congressional delegation. We're hearing from the governor. We also know that there are members of the city council that have gotten involved, the mayor as well. With so many voices and so many people trying to be involved in this, how do you think the best method forward is to openly communicate while also effectively getting this done with so many people involved?
Well, it really is a matter of staying in touch, staying in communication. I get regularly briefed and updated by the Department of Defense and others, whether I outreach to them or not. But I don't believe that that's the way to do it. I mean, I can sit in my office and have people come to me, but that's not good enough. You have to go out there and actually outreach. You have to ask the questions that are coming in. You have to oftentimes serve as a translator of sorts between our community in Hawaii and the Pentagon here, Congress itself, because let's not forget that Congress has to fund this, and we've already funded 1.1 billion in the current fiscal year, and I'm trying to get another 1 billion plus for the next fiscal year, along with the delegation. And so that's a matter of spending a lot of time with my colleagues who don't have an immediate familiarity with Red Hill and what happened at Red Hill. So I take my colleagues into Red Hill. I just took some colleagues into Red Hill 6 weeks ago again. So I wish I could say, well, this is the one thing I do, but in fact, it's a variety of actions. A lot of it outreach. Like, for example, now that I know that the Admiral is in charge of the task force, I'm going to look him up. And the next time I can get together with him, as soon as I can, I'm going to establish a relationship. I'm going to tell him that I'm here to help him. I'm going to tell him that I'm here to ask the questions, and I'm sure he'll appreciate both of those. So, a lot of this is the relationships that you build with the various people of hopefully of trust, of credibility, and them understanding that your job is to protect the people of Hawaii, and your job is to assure the safety and to defuel and close Red Hill. So, it's kind of across the board.
Tell us a little bit about this, Admiral. I know that you say that you're, obviously 7 minutes ago, so breaking news with us this morning, and thank you for sharing that. What are your expectations of what he will do, and what are your first impressions? You've had this news a little bit longer than we have, so tell us your impressions of the gentleman who will be heading this up.
Well, here's the basic problem with Red Hill, if you let it be a problem, and it was a problem. That was one of the contributing factors to the tragedy of Red Hill, is that a lot of different parts. The Department of Defense is a huge bureaucracy. It sprawls all over the place, and it's got various segments that have their own area of responsibility, but they overlap all the time. They have joint efforts, but they're not always coordinated. And I think we saw that at Red Hill, where there was not sufficient coordination in the training at Red Hill and the maintenance of Red Hill and in the response to Red Hill. And so one thing that is always a concern in federal government in particular, but especially in the Department of Defense, is are the various parts of the Department of Defense coordinated with each other? Do they understand what each other is trying to accomplish? Is somebody in charge? Because when you have a mushy leadership structure with a major disciplinary challenge like Red Hill, you can get yourself in a world of hurt really fast. And so my expectation, and I think that the Secretary of Defense's expectation, and this is something, by the way, that the congressional delegation also weighed in to him and said, the Secretary of Defense I'm talking about, and saying, hey, you got to have one person that's in charge. You can't just You can't just like have 3 or 4 people all kind of looking at each other saying, what do we do next? You got to have one person, and that person has direct responsibility to the Secretary of Defense, in this case through Admiral Aquilino, who is Indo-PACOM. So that's good. That's a coordination at the Indo-PACOM level, and then straight from Aquilino, obviously, to the Secretary of Defense. So that's a good overall structure. So, my expectation of the Admiral is that he is going to take charge. He is going to assert that he needs to be part of every decision, that the decisions flow to him, that where there are conflicts in the decisions from various parts of the Navy and externally for that matter, that he needs to resolve them, cut through, and make those decisions that are going to keep this defueling project online. So that's my major expectation of him, is that he's going to keep this thing coordinated and on track. Other than that, I obviously have other expectations of him. I expect him to outreach to the congressional delegation. He's not going to have to do that because we're probably going to find him before he finds us. I expect him to consult with the community. I expect him to have a very, very good and a clear message on the actions that need to be taken, so that nobody is taken by surprise as to the steps that need to be pursued. And I expect him very much to collaborate with his partners in this defueling. And by that, I refer primarily to the Environmental Protection Agency for the federal government, the state of Hawaii for the through the Department of Health, the city and county of Honolulu through the Board of Water Supply, and the community. He needs to collaborate. He needs to communicate. He needs to coordinate with all of those players.
I want to bring in a question from some of our viewers here. Heidi's asking, will Congress assist with the funds to drill new wells? We spoke to Ernie Lau here on this program, who said that is currently underway to look for other sources of water now that that aquifer that has been contaminated has been shut down indefinitely. There are some concerns about those costs that are associated with what has happened on Red Hill. You spoke about the Appropriations Committee and finding funding for that. Will that cover things such as finding new wells beyond just the cleanup itself, but finding other sources of water for those residents of Oahu?
Well, here's really the policy overall policy goal that I pursue on these kinds of questions. Where there was a consequence from Red Hill leaking, from people getting injured, from threats to our water supply, where anybody had to take a step that they wouldn't have otherwise had to take but for Red Hill, that is the responsibility of the federal government. That is the responsibility of the Department of Defense. And that should be part of their compensation, their financial effort. And we have drafted the appropriations bills broad enough and flexibly enough so that it could, in fact, encompass efforts by the Board of Water Supply to assure an alternative, an alternative for our water supply in the contingency that we still do have contamination that may not have shown up yet. And so from my perspective, the answer is we should do that. And I believe we have the flexibility to do that, but we're obviously going to have to work through with the Navy and with the Board of Water Supply directly exactly how we pull that off.
I want to move on to some other topics, but again, thank you for sharing all of that information with us. We learned a lot this morning on Red Hill. How do you think we're doing as a country in terms of COVID? We are in kind of the next step, phase 2, if you will, the pandemic not over, but certainly not where we once were. Where do you think we are as a community here in Hawaii and as a country when it comes to the virus?
Well, I mean, if you ask me for a snapshot today in our country, I would say we're in a pretty good place. We have seen substantial reductions both nationally and in Hawaii in terms of infections from COVID. Just in the very recent weeks and months, we've seen roughly a 33%, almost a 33% reduction in Hawaii alone in the last 2 weeks. We've seen comparable reductions across the country. We've seen fewer people getting infected, and when they get infected, there are fewer, hospitalizations. So that's all, of course, good news. But I guess I'm just a little jaded by the experience of the last 2.5 years because we've been here before. And although I think we are in better shape than we were 6 months ago, a year ago, certainly 2 years ago, I don't want to pronounce everything okay because we already know if we haven't learned by now that COVID is an extremely adaptable virus, that it can mutate very fast and create new and more infectious variants, and then we haven't learned anything. And of course, that is true. That's a scientific fact. That's what's happened. And so, we still have to be, it doesn't have to shut down our lives anymore. It doesn't have to, cause all of the tough decisions that we've had to face in the last couple of years and the consequences. But people are still getting sick. People are dying. We've got about a quarter of the deaths that we did not too long ago. So that's good news too. But that's more deaths than we had 3 years ago. So I don't want to say that everything's okay. The facts still remain the same. We all need to try to get our vaccinations up to speed. Hawaii is doing well there. We're above the national averages. Nationally, we've got maybe 2/3 of folks that have a pretty good vaccination history, but that leaves 1/3 still exposed. That's comparable in Hawaii. We have seen increases in unusual places just in the last month. We've seen Japan up in infections about 26% just in about the last month. That's Japan. They were doing pretty darn well. And so that should be caution. So bottom line, we're doing well, but to let it go and say we don't need to get that 4th or 5th, vaccination, or we don't need to be careful about when we gather together and and there's never a reason to put on a mask again. No, that's not what the advice is from the CDC. The CDC says still be careful and take your precautions, and we can get through this. But we don't know what the future is going to bring, so I'd rather be cautious in that department.
I want to also move on to something else that is in front of Congress right now. Once again, the threat of a government shutdown looms with the end of the fiscal year, which arrives at the end of this month on September 30th. Your thoughts about where you folks are at right now with some of the negotiations that need to happen in order to prevent that, and any other concerns that you have with this looming deadline?
Well, I am concerned, and I'm disgusted, I guess would be a better way of putting it, because, I have, been back in Congress this time around. This is my 4th appropriations cycle on the Appropriations Committee, my 4th beginning of the next fiscal year. The year that I got back here, 2018, 2019, was a full-blown government shutdown. The government did shut down. The next couple of years, we came right up to the brink and had to go with what we call a continuing resolution, which is kind of a fancy way of saying we're just going to continue to spend the same amounts for the same programs as last year while we figure out how to get done what we should have gotten done by the end of the fiscal year. And these CRs, as we call them, are highly problematic for our federal agencies in terms of predictability, in terms of funding, especially for the Department of Defense, where it just messes up their procurement programs. Certainly, I want to get the appropriations bills for the coming fiscal year. And by the way, just for your viewers, we're talking about October 1st being the beginning of our next fiscal year. So by October 1st, in 11 days, we should have passed all of our appropriations bills and authorized spending for the next year for our federal government, some $1.6 trillion worth of federal spending. We have not done that today. And so we are negotiating a continuing resolution right now that we need to pass to avoid any kind of a government shutdown. I think we'll get that done, but that's top of mind to me right now. It's why we're all back here in Washington, D.C. We need to get that done. I don't think that we will actually have a government shutdown. I think the overall atmosphere in which we're operating, it seems to be trending towards some kind of a continuing resolution to buy us some time to get the appropriations bills done. But it is a concern, and again, it does not reflect well on our government in a very continuing partisan and divided time.
Sticking with money matters, I want to ask you about how much progress you've been able to make on the Jones Act. I know this is an issue that you campaigned on, something that you've been speaking about for many, many years. Just the burden that adds to Hawaii families having that in place, and something that you called on the president to waive, especially in the light of the conflict in Ukraine. What are those conversations like? How has that message been received?
Well, if you follow the Jones Act at all, you know that I don't believe that it is fair to an island state like Hawaii, because it creates a monopoly in our shipping. And of course, we don't have the options of a train down here from California, or a truck or whatever. We rely on our shipping. And if shipping is captured by just a few companies as it is, then prices go up. We probably are paying somewhere around 20-25% extra over the mainland across the board. So, imagine that, of course, we're in major inflation right now, but let's take inflation and then tack on a Jones Act surcharge. That's not fair to people in Hawaii. By some estimates, probably the best estimates I've seen of studies that have actually tried to strip it out and really quantify the Jones Act impact on Hawaii, the cost is somewhere around $650 per person, every person, not family, person in Hawaii. That's the Jones Act's cost. So I don't think it's fair to Hawaii, and I've tried to get it adjusted for island states like Hawaii. It's a hard slog. The people that like that monopoly are highly entrenched in Washington. My own colleagues in the congressional delegation have a different perspective. I respect their perspective, but when you're going down, when you're storming these hills, you'd like to do it with the rest of your delegation, and this is a little bit more lonely from that perspective. I am encouraged that there's a lot. The fact that you're asking me that question, by the way, is progress of sorts, because nobody would have asked me that question even as much as 2 or 3 years ago. Now, the Jones Act has a particular impact in the post-Ukraine Russian embargo situation, because we were getting upwards of 25% of our fossil fuel in Hawaii directly from overseas. The reason we did that, because the Jones Act makes it too expensive to bring it in from the continent. And so it's cheaper for us to just ship it in on non-Jones Act shippers from overseas. I was coming from Russia. We rightly turned off that spigot even before our country did. But now we have to find oil somewhere else. And the fact of the matter is, if we can't find it on the world market, then we got to find it from our own country. And yet the Jones Act makes that a practical impossibility. So I asked the president some months ago to waive the Jones Act in the case of getting oil into Hawaii from the continent during the Ukraine emergency. And in so many words, what the administration responded to me on was, well, if it gets to be that kind of a problem where you are actually not finding oil on the world market to replace Russia in Hawaii, then we'll consider that waiver. We haven't been in that situation yet, because we actually have been able to buy oil in other places on the world market, and so it has not approached the level of severity that could occur if we had a true international oil dislocation. But I feel that was a very productive conversation with the administration. So I've got that assurance to go on if we get to that situation.
One of the things that you mentioned was inflation, and wanted to get your thoughts on where we're at, what we're seeing with our prices, and especially here locally, with some of those prices being more than what others on the mainland would see. Do you believe that there's anything that can be done on a federal level that will assist with this, with Hawaii residents that are seeing prices go up? And what is your overall take on where we're at with inflation and the state of our economy as a whole, as a country?
Well, I think you'd have to say that the state of our economy, although the fundamentals are pretty solid, aspects of our economy are obviously pretty shaky, and I don't think we're in a situation like we were in 2008, where we had that kind of real tanking of our economy, or for that matter, prior situations. But these are difficult times to go through. We obviously all have a sense of basic instability in our economy. I think that some of the bills that we've passed out of Congress and the president has signed into law have been stabilizing influences on the economy and will help the foundations of the economy, like our bipartisan infrastructure law from last year, the Inflation Reduction Act that we just passed. I think those will help pull us through this time. Inflation, once it takes hold, it takes a while to get it back out of the system. There's no other way to say that. I mean, that's what history teaches. Inflation, you try not to get into inflationary environments because they're so tough to get back out of, at least in the short term. We do know that some of the causes of inflation, to include really supply chain dislocations, are slowly but surely opening up again. We certainly are seeing a shortage in our labor force, which is causing inflation from from an employment perspective. So the drivers of inflation are all being mitigated right now, but that doesn't mean it's going to go away overnight. I have heard from a number of folks that I consider to be knowledgeable and to have some expertise in this area that do believe that they'll see a modification of inflation over the next 6 months or so that it comes down by early next year. But it's not going to get leached out of our system and go back to 0 or 1 or anything like that. So it's still going to be a long slog. I hate to say that. We can work on it on the congressional level, but there's no silver bullet.
You spoke about the delegation, and I'm interested to know, obviously, Congressman Kai Kahele decided to run for governor and is leaving the delegation. You are up for re-election. If you are to continue, you will continue with a new colleague. Tell us a little bit about what you're anticipating in the next person who will join your team.
Well, I mean, not to get into the politics of it, but since you asked me that, I think the chances are that if I continue here, that my colleague will be Jill Takuda, who I think will be a very good addition to the delegation. I've already met with her many times, just to kind of do the same thing I did with Congressman Kahele at a comparable period, which was to say to him, look, it's likely that you're going to prevail, but we can't wait until November to start getting you ready. There's a lot to get ready for right now. And the more you absorb right now, the more you plan right now, the more you know right now, the more you can work right now to get yourself ready for January, the better it's going to be for you and for the delegation and for Hawaii. And so I've invested quite a bit of time and effort in trying to get her up to speed. She's actually in DC. I just saw her about 2 hours ago. I was in Congressman Kahele's office, and so she's here. She's getting ready. I mean no disrespect to her opponent. That's up to the voters. But I'm making my judgment about trying to get the person that I think is going to be my colleague good to go, so that when she gets up here in January, it'll be a little bit like Congressman Kahele, who I thought was about the best prepared freshman member of Congress ever, because he'd been drinking from the fire hose for the 4 months plus prior to that. So I need a partner. This is a 4-person delegation. Senators Hirono and Schatz are wonderful partners. We've had a wonderful delegation, and yet on the U.S. House of Representatives side, it's only 2 of us. And so I'm finishing up my 8th+ year here, so I hope I know what I'm doing at this point. But even with all of that, experience and seniority and knowledge and relationships, I still need a partner. I can't do this alone. And so for my purposes, if I can develop a partnership, doesn't mean we're always going to agree on everything. We're not. I didn't agree with Congressman Kahele on everything. But if we can have a partnership, that's going to be good all around. So I'm anticipating that I will have that partnership with whoever takes over for Congressman Kahele.
Well, our time is almost up, but before we let you go, we just want to allow you a final message that you will have for those watching here this morning, maybe those who have concerns about various issues that we weren't able to address, but your final message this morning to those back here in Hawaii watching this morning.
I'm on the job. My office is open. We are working through the three parts of my mission. Number 1, national leadership, to contribute to national leadership on some of the issues we've already talked about. We didn't even talk about some of the major issues like Ukraine and China and other domestic issues. Number 2, to help Hawaii wherever I can. But number 3, just to communicate with the people that I represent and serve, what's going on up here, to answer your questions, to take care of your individual concerns. And so I hope that people, although we're in the middle of a pretty intense midterm election, both nationally and in Hawaii, it doesn't take away from the job that I have. I still have the job. And so as long as I have that job, my office is open. And the best way in is www.edcase.com. I'm sorry, disregard that because I used the wrong one. That's a mistake. That's not the right one. Case.house.gov, case.house.gov.
We appreciate that. And thank you so much for spending so much time with us, especially on the Red Hill conversation. Very interesting to get your quick take on the new admiral who will be at the helm of so many important decisions here in Hawaii. So thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Aloha.
Always great to catch up with him. And as he noted 7 minutes into our conversation, news released that there will be a new admiral taking over the Red Hill defueling operation. That person will be the sole individual in charge of handling the decommissioning of that facility and the cleanup and whatever is to come. That's something that the delegation has called for, the congressional delegation, so that they would have one person to answer, to talk to and to deal with. As you noted, Ryan, there are so many different stakeholders in this conversation, from the city all the way up to the federal government. So having that one key person is expected to make a big difference in streamlining this process.
Yeah, the congressman saying that that was something that they were calling for. And so the announcement of that admiral this morning will help in that process, and also saying that he will be reaching out to him soon to begin those conversations and to see how they can work together on this issue. Because as we know, this new timeline that has been set forth, uh, albeit a sooner timeline that was originally drafted, there is still some concern over the length of time it will take. And so those conversations will continue to happen. But you heard from the congressman that safety is, of course, of the utmost importance to make sure that this process is done correctly and done safely. And so having an individual that is assigned to this will definitely help in that process. We also heard from him about his role in the Appropriations Committee and his work continuing to ensure that this is a problem that he is making his colleagues aware of, noting that he's actually given tours to some of his colleagues of the facilities and addressing some of the issues and some of the problems and bringing that to a national spotlight and a national stage, so that others within the delegation, or I should say within Congress, understand the importance of funding for this large project that will take some time to defuel.
Right. And he did note that he believes that anything that is affected by Red Hill, like having to drill new wells or do with any of the cleanup efforts, that should not fall on the shoulders of the ratepayers of Hawaii, but really that is the Department of Defense should be covering that. And so he is working to make sure that that happens. Also talking more broadly about the economy and his thoughts on inflation, that unfortunately we are going to be stuck in this for some time to come. He did speak about his efforts to try to clear the way for some waivers on the Jones Act to at least lower the cost of fuel here in Hawaii. He said that there is some reception of that message at the White House, but so far we have been able to, get fuel from sources other than Russia, and that we haven't necessarily needed that up until this point. But that is a conversation that he is making some headway on. So that is encouraging as well. And talking about his work and making sure that the government does not shut down in the next 11 days.
Yeah, he actually saying that he was disgusted at the point that they're at and they find themselves at right now, but saying that that is, of course, going to be of the utmost importance with just a few more weeks before with that looming deadline approaching. We also heard of his talks and his working relationship with maybe a potential colleague in Jill Takuda, saying that he has been helping her just navigate through this process and looking forward to a partnership moving forward with a potential mate in Jill Takuda, both representing Hawaii in Congress. We'll see how things pan out with the upcoming election. But always great to hear and get that update from DC. We look forward to future conversations with the congressman. On Wednesday, we are sticking a little more local.
That's right. Governor David Ige will be joining us, and we'll be very interested to get his thoughts. First off, on that truncated timeline, shaving off 3 months to the end of the Navy's projected decommissioning of the Red Hill facility, and also talking about the new admiral who's in charge, his impressions. That was just announced this morning. We will be interested to hear what those conversations have been like, if he's had an opportunity to meet this individual by then. And of course, his thoughts on how the state is doing overall more broadly. So please bring your questions for Governor David Ige. Join us right back here on Wednesday at 10:30.
We'll see you then. Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.